My husband looked at me over breakfast and said, "I've got a date tonight. Don't get jealous." I smiled so calmly he thought I didn't care, but what I did next made sure he'd never forget it. Looking back, the signs were always there. I just didn't want to believe the man I married could lie to my face that easily. If you've ever missed a red flag until it smacked you in the heart, this story's for you. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. I'll tell you what happened that morning step by step because now I realize every detail mattered. Daniel and I had been married for 3 years and we had this routine where we'd sit at our kitchen island every morning with our coffee before I headed to my bookstore cafe. He'd be scrolling through his work emails while I reviewed inventory orders on my laptop and we'd talk about our day ahead. That Thursday started like any other in our Raleigh home. The morning sun filtering through our bay windows, the smell of fresh coffee from our expensive machine Daniel had insisted we needed, and the comfortable silence of a couple who'd settled into their rhythm. Daniel was wearing that gray Henley I'd gotten him for his birthday, his dark hair still messy from sleep, and he had this expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. He was stirring his coffee with this little smile that seemed different somehow. Now Daniel had his habits. He always added 2 sugars, no cream, and stirred exactly 3 times counterclockwise. But that morning he kept stirring, round and round like he was working up to something. So he said, "Still stirring, I'm going on a date tonight." The words came out so casually, like he was telling me about a client dinner. I looked up from my laptop, sure I'd misheard him. "What? A date?" "Don't be jealous, Lauren." He said it with this smug little grin, like he was proud of himself for being so bold. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "A date," I repeated. "Yes, with someone I've been talking to. It's nothing serious, just dinner and maybe drinks." He was still stirring that coffee, round and round, like he was mixing up the perfect storm. I sat there for a moment watching him and something clicked in my mind. All those late nights when he said he was meeting clients, all those weekend conferences that suddenly popped up, all those times he'd guard his phone like it contained nuclear codes. The pieces started falling into place with a clarity that was almost painful. "Well," I said, closing my laptop and looking directly at him, "I hope your date appreciates the new cologne you've been wearing. The one that's definitely not the Tom Ford I bought you for Christmas." Daniel's spoon stopped mid-stir. The smug smile vanished from his face, replaced by something that looked like shock mixed with panic. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in months he seemed genuinely caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" he managed to say. I stood up, picked up my coffee mug, and walked over to rinse it in the sink. "It means exactly what it means, Daniel. Enjoy your date." I gave him a calm smile, the kind you'd give a stranger at the grocery store, and headed upstairs to our bedroom. He followed me, his voice rising. "Lauren, what are you talking about? It's just a casual dinner." But I was already closing the bedroom door behind me. I turned the lock, something I'd never done in our entire marriage, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I could hear him on the other side knocking softly at first, then more insistently. "Lauren, please, let's talk about this." But I just sat there staring at the wall, processing what had just happened. My husband of 3 years had just announced he was going on a date, told me not to be jealous, and expected me to what? Pack him a lunch? Iron his shirt? The audacity of it was almost impressive. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through our text messages from the past few weeks. All those times he'd said he was working late. All those weekends when he'd suddenly had to help his brother move or attend a last-minute conference. I'd been so focused on keeping our bookstore afloat, working extra hours to expand the cafe section, that I'd missed the obvious signs. Or maybe I'd chosen to ignore them. Either way, I was done ignoring them now. The knocking on the door had stopped. I could hear Daniel's footsteps retreating down the hallway and then the sound of the garage door opening. He'd left for work or wherever he was really going. I sat there for another hour, not moving, just thinking. Then I got up, got dressed, and headed to my bookstore like it was any other day. Because in a way, it was just the first day of the rest of my life, without Daniel. The next few days were like living in some twisted alternate reality where everything looked normal on the surface but felt completely wrong underneath. Daniel acted like nothing had happened, chatting about his day at the tech firm, asking about sales at the bookstore, even suggesting we try that new sushi place on Glenwood Avenue. But I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way he angled his phone away from me when he texted, how he'd suddenly started going to the gym at odd hours, and the fact that he'd bought new underwear, designer boxer briefs that I'd never seen him wear around the house. I started paying closer attention to his belongings, and that's when I found it. Daniel kept a leather portfolio in his home office, one of those expensive ones where he stored contracts and important documents. He'd left it open on his desk Friday morning while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the warranty for our coffee machine. But there it was, tucked between 2 client proposals, a receipt from the Cardinal, the most expensive steakhouse in downtown Raleigh, the one we'd never been to because it was way out of our budget. But it wasn't just any receipt. Someone had written "same booth, same wine" in purple ink, and there was a lipstick mark pressed into the corner like a kiss. My hand started shaking as I held it up to the light. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's, it was too loopy, too feminine. I took a photo of it with my phone, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. The rest of the day at the bookstore, I couldn't focus on anything. My assistant manager Sophie kept asking if I was okay, but I just told her I was tired. That evening, Daniel announced he was going out with some colleagues from work. Just a guy's night, he said, putting on that navy blazer he'd worn to our rehearsal dinner 2 years ago. Don't wait up. I watched him apply his cologne with extra care. Not the Tom Ford, but something new, something spicier, and I knew. I waited 20 minutes after he left, then got in my car and drove to the Cardinal. I'd had a hunch, and sure enough there was Daniel's BMW in the valet section. I parked across the street and walked into the restaurant trying to look casual. The dining room was dimly lit with candlelit tables, and I spotted them immediately. Daniel was sitting in a corner booth with a woman I'd never seen before. She was stunning. Long red hair, probably early 30s, with the kind of confident laugh that filled the space around her. This had to be Megan, the marketing director he'd mentioned in passing a few months ago. I watched them for about 15 minutes, noting how she kept touching his hand, how she looked at him the way she probably looked at every married man she targeted, how he leaned in when she talked like her words were made of gold. They finished their drinks and asked for the check. The way they moved together, comfortable and familiar, told me this wasn't their first time. I left before they did and sat in my car waiting. Sure enough, they came out together and he walked her to her car. A white Lexus. They kissed. Not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, the kind that lasted too long for anyone claiming to be just friends. I drove home and sat in my living room waiting. Daniel came home around midnight, trying to be quiet as he slipped through the front door. How was guys' night? I asked from the couch, making him jump. Oh, it was good, he said, not meeting my eyes. We went to that sports bar on Hillsborough Street. But I could smell it on him. Her perfume, something floral and expensive. And there, just barely visible on his collar, was a small smudge of red lipstick that matched the mark on that receipt perfectly. That's nice, I said, turning back to my book. I'm glad you had a good time. If you're still listening, hit that like button. Trust me, this story gets even better. Saturday morning started with Daniel's phone buzzing nonstop. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and I could see text after text lighting up the screen. Most of them were from a contact labeled M. Work. Megan, I assumed. The messages were coming in so fast I couldn't read them all, but I caught glimpses of words like last night, amazing, and when can I see you again? When Daniel came downstairs, his hair still damp from the shower, he grabbed his phone with eager hands and started scrolling through the messages. A smile spread across his face as he read, and I watched his fingers fly across the screen as he typed back. Everything okay? I asked, pouring myself another cup of coffee. Yeah, just work stuff, he said, not looking up from his phone. But his body language said otherwise. The way he turned slightly away from me, the little smile he couldn't quite hide, the way he kept checking his phone every few seconds like a teenager with a crush. The phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID before quickly declining the call. It rang again immediately. He declined it again. By the third ring, he looked annoyed. You should probably answer that, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Sounds important. He shot me a look I couldn't quite read, but he answered the phone this time. Hello? His voice was casual, practiced. I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, talking fast and excited, though I couldn't make out the words. Daniel kept saying, I know, and me too, and we'll figure it out. Finally, he hung up and turned to me with this forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lauren, we need to talk. Sure, I said, setting down my coffee mug. What's on your mind? It's about the other night. I know you might have gotten the wrong impression, but Megan is just a colleague. We were discussing a big project. I nodded thoughtfully. Megan, the marketing director? Yes, exactly. She's been helping me with a presentation. At the Cardinal Steakhouse. The question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Daniel's face went through several expressions. Surprise, fear, then something that looked like calculation. How did you? He started, then stopped himself. I mean, yes, we had dinner there. It's close to her office. Nothing inappropriate, Lauren. I don't know why you're being so paranoid. Paranoid, I repeated, pulling out my phone. That's an interesting word choice. I showed him the photo I'd taken of the receipt with the lipstick mark. Can you explain what same booth, same wine means, and whose lipstick this is? Daniel looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, more defensive. You went through my personal things? You followed me, Lauren? That's controlling behavior. That's not healthy. Controlling, I said, leaning back in my chair. Interesting. So let me get this straight. You announce you're going on a date. Tell me not to be jealous. Spend the evening at a romantic restaurant with another woman, come home with her lipstick on your collar, and I'm the one with the problem. It wasn't like that, he snapped. You don't understand. You've been so consumed with that bookstore lately, working all the time, always stressed about money. I was lonely, Lauren. I needed someone who actually had time for me. So you found Megan. So I found a friend who gets me, who shares my interests. In corner booths at expensive restaurants. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, it just evolved. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet street. Mrs. Chen was walking her poodle. The teenage Harrison kids were shooting hoops in their driveway. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. Daniel, I said, turning back to him, I need you to pack some things and stay at your brother's for a while. What? The word came out as a whisper. I think we both need some time to think about what we want from this marriage, and I need some space to figure out how I feel about everything. Lauren, please, we can work through this. I'll cut contact with Megan. We can go to counseling. Pack your things, Daniel. My voice was calm, steady. Take whatever you need. I'll be at the bookstore if you want to talk later. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't turn around. About 2 hours later, while I was reorganizing the romance section, the irony wasn't lost on me. Sophie called out that I had a visitor. I walked to the front to find Patricia, Daniel's mother, standing by the new releases table. Patricia was in her 60s, a retired principal who'd always been protective of her son. She looked ready for battle. Lauren, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. Daniel called me in tears. He said you threw him out of the house over some misunderstanding about a coworker. I didn't throw him out, Patricia. I suggested he stay with Marcus while we work through some issues. Issues? Her voice rose. He told me you've been accusing him of having an affair. He said you've been following him around, going through his things. This doesn't sound like the Lauren I know. You're right, I said, pulling out my phone. It's not the Lauren you know, but sometimes people change when they have to. I showed her the photo of the receipt and explained about the restaurant, the texts, the lies. Patricia took the phone, adjusting her reading glasses. Her expression shifted from defensive to confused to something that looked like disappointment. Lauren, I don't know what to say. Daniel told me you were being irrational, that work stress was making you imagine things. I know this is hard to hear, Patricia. I love Daniel, but I can't pretend this isn't happening anymore. She handed me back my phone and stood there in silence for a moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice much quieter than before. He's been different lately. More secretive. I thought it was just work pressure, but, she trailed off, shaking her head. I need to have a conversation with my son. 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Daniel had been staying at his brother Marcus's apartment, and according to Marcus's wife, who'd reached out to me, things weren't going well. Apparently, Megan had ended whatever they had going on the moment she found out Daniel had been kicked out of his house. She told him it was getting too complicated, that she wasn't looking for drama. I felt a twinge of something, not quite satisfaction, but maybe validation. Daniel had thrown away 3 years of marriage for a woman who bailed the second things got messy. I'd been using those 2 weeks to think, to really process what I wanted from my life. I'd started seeing Dr. Rivera, a marriage counselor, not because I wanted to save my marriage, but because I needed to understand how I'd gotten to this point. During our sessions, it became clear that Daniel had been manipulating situations for months, making me feel like I was the problem whenever I questioned his behavior. Gaslighting, Dr. Rivera called it. He was rewriting reality to make you doubt your own perceptions. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Daniel decided to come home. I was at the bookstore working on next month's author event schedule when Sophie came over with a concerned look on her face. Lauren, your husband's been calling the store phone. He says he can't reach you on your cell and needs to talk to you urgently. I'd changed my number the week before, something I probably should have mentioned to Daniel but hadn't gotten around to. What did you tell him? That you were busy with a customer and would call him back. But he sounded pretty desperate. I nodded and went back to work. About an hour later, my new cell phone rang. It was Patricia. Lauren, Daniel went to your house. He's not handling things well. Not handling what well? The locks. You changed the locks. I had indeed changed the locks. I'd also left a note taped to the front door that simply said, please communicate through my attorney if needed. It wasn't cruel, just clear. He's on his way to the bookstore, Patricia continued. He's pretty worked up. I thought you should know. I thanked Patricia and hung up. About 20 minutes later, Daniel burst through the bookstore doors like a hurricane. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were red from either crying or lack of sleep, and he looked like he hadn't shaved in days. Lauren, he called out, marching past the customers browsing the bestseller section. We need to talk. Now. I looked up from the inventory spreadsheet I was reviewing. Daniel, this isn't the place. I don't care. You changed the locks on our house. You changed your phone number. You left me a note like I'm some kind of stranger. Several customers were staring now. Sophie moved closer, ready to intervene if needed. You're not a stranger, I said calmly, standing up. But you're not my husband anymore either. Not really. What's that supposed to mean? Lauren, I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Megan was nothing. She was just a distraction. I realize now that what we have is real. What we have is worth fighting for. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd loved for 3 years, planned a future with, built a life with, and I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not longing, just a kind of empty clarity. Daniel, do you know what I learned about myself these past 2 weeks? What? I learned that I deserve someone who doesn't need distractions. I deserve someone who thinks our marriage is worth protecting, not worth risking for a thrill. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my wedding ring. I'd stopped wearing it the day he left. I set it on the counter between us with a soft metallic click. I deserve someone who doesn't think don't be jealous is an appropriate way to announce a date with another woman. Daniel stared at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. Lauren, please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. I know you do, Daniel. In your own way, but your way of loving isn't enough anymore. Respect is what matters. Trust is what matters, and those are things you can't just decide to give back after you've thrown them away. He stood there for a moment, looking lost and smaller than I'd ever seen him. Then he picked up the ring and held it out to me. I don't want this to be over. It's been over since the morning you told me about your date, I said gently. I just finally accepted it. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories like this. Your support means everything. That was 6 months ago. Daniel tried calling Patricia's house a few times, tried reaching out through mutual friends, even showed up at the bookstore once more, but I'd learned something valuable from Dr. Rivera. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence has a way of speaking louder than any argument ever could. The divorce was finalized last month. Clean, simple, no drama. We sold the house, split the assets, and went our separate ways. Daniel moved to Charlotte for a fresh start with a new company. I heard through Marcus's wife that he's in therapy now, trying to figure out his patterns. I hope he does figure it out. I really do. These days I'm dating James, who owns the coffee roasting company that supplies my bookstore cafe. He's honest about everything, sometimes to a fault. He doesn't guard his phone, doesn't make up elaborate stories about where he's been, and when he says he's thinking about me, he sends a quick text just to prove it. James knows about Daniel, about the divorce, about all of it, and he's never once made me feel like I was asking for too much when I asked for basic honesty and respect. The bookstore is thriving now. We expanded the cafe section, started hosting more author events, and even opened a second location in Durham. Funny how much energy you have when you're not constantly wondering if your partner is lying to you. Sometimes I see Daniel's BMW when I visit Charlotte for book conventions. He still has that same car, probably still parks it in valet sections of expensive restaurants, but I don't feel anything when I see it. No anger, no sadness, no what-ifs. Patricia still comes to my bookstore sometimes. She buys her romance novels and we chat about the weather, about books, about everything except Daniel. Last week she squeezed my hand before leaving and said, "You look happy, Lauren. Really happy." And you know what? I've built something good here. Something solid. Something based on the revolutionary idea that marriage should be a partnership, not a performance. That love should be a choice you make every day, not a word you throw around to cover up lies. And I'm not available for anything less than that anymore. Not now, not ever. So that's my story. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more interesting stories. And remember, you deserve someone who chooses you, not someone who keeps you as an option while they explore others.